Hello, this is a video to explain to you a technique that I figured out, an easy way, and that's the word I want to emphasize, is easy. An easy way to explain how to do the Kitchener stitch. You know, there are tons of videos and tons of explanations of how to do Kitchener stitch, and people have cheat sheets and they get out books, and they have I've even seen necklaces and all kinds of things to say do this, do that, do this. There are 6 steps, there are 18 steps, there are 12 steps, there are all these kinds of things. Well, the thing is, so many people dread doing Kitchener stitch that it became ridiculous. But I figured out, I had one of those aha moments that you have, and lo and behold, it's very easy. And by the time this video is over, I hope that you will feel it's easy too. Kitchener stitch is nothing more than a way of grafting stitches together, where we have 2 sets of live stitches and we want to put them together to form a seamless. Here we go. These 2 swatches used to look exactly like these 2 swatches, but they have been grafted together using the Kitchener stitch. And you see here, you can hardly see on this side particularly where they were put together, and on the reverse side you can't tell at all that they've been put together. Over here I can tell where I put them together because the tension isn't exactly right, but I wanted you to see this. I left this on purpose because I can come in here and I can cinch up, if you will, and work on the tension. And I'll show you this. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I wanted you to see that there are ways of making this almost virtually invisible once you do this. Now, Kitchener stitch can be done, as you see we're doing this in the stockinette stitch. It can be done in stockinette stitch, it can be done in garter stitch. I've even seen examples and explanations where it can be done with ribbing, it can be done with lace. My technique, I must admit, I have not gotten it down to where I can make it in my easy technique to do with those techniques, and hopefully eventually I'll have that down to where I can do my easy technique with all those various things explained easily too. But right now I'm going to concentrate on the stockinette stitch. I was curious as to, you might notice that Kitchener stitch is always spelled with a capital K, Kitchener. And in doing some research, I found out that it's named for Lord Kitchener, Lord Horatio Herbert Kitchener. He was the Secretary of State for War in the First World War, the British Secretary of State for War in the British World War. And it seems that up until that time that socks for the British soldiers and service people all had seams in them, and those seams, as you can imagine, in the socks would cause an irritant for the soldiers' feet. And that irritant, can you imagine, constant irritant where that seam would cause sores, and those sores would cause infections and blah blah blah. So before you know it, those simple socks were causing a lot of problems for those soldiers and seamen's feet. And so Lord Kitchener, there's great controversy about this. Some people say Lord Kitchener himself devised this technique. Whether that's true or not, or whether he commissioned someone to do it, it doesn't matter. But he figured out, or had figured out, a way to make this join here where there is no seam here. And it's a terrific thing. As you can well imagine, it's a fine technique for when you want something to be just as smooth and as nice as it can be, like this. Some people use it to join sweaters at the tops of seams of a at the top of your, instead of doing a seam at the top of your shoulder. Depends on the weight of the sweater. If it's going to be a very heavy sweater, you may want to put a seam. So you have to use some judgment as to when and where you use this. But it is typically used for socks. Here, for example, is a sock, and you can see here how that Kitchener stitch, and this is a sock made from the top down, and you can see how this was 4 or 6 stitches, and you can see how this is not, you can't even see that it wasn't seamed, it was Kitchenered, but one stitch just goes right over to the other. Now, as I say, there are many techniques and many cheat sheets, and they'll say do this, do that, and it's a 6-step process. It's all this. What I would like for you to get into your mind as we go through my process is just to remember off, on. It's all you have to remember. Off, on. Off, on. And then one time we're going to knit off and purl on. And the next time we're going to purl off and knit on. And there's going to be a trick to that, an easy way to remember that. So it's off, on. That's easy enough to remember. Off, on. It's always off, on. Now there's one minor exception to that. You know how in many cases when we're knitting, we have what's called a setup row, where we do something one time and one time only to get something set up. And with the Kitchener stitch, we do that one time. Remember I said it's always off, on? Well, the setup row we're going to do, the first time we do the thing, we're going to do a setup row. And so we're going to do an on, on. But after we do the on, then we're going to revert back to doing off, on, off, on. The thing is that where this makes this easy, that you'll never have to use those cheat sheets, is I'm going to show you how your work can tell you which way to do this. What I'm also going to recommend to you that you do is that you instead of waiting till you have to do this on a real project, is that you do this with some samples here. And I've cast on a few stitches here, as you can see, and then I have worked this, did the yellow, and then I've worked the Kitchener stitch in the white. And this is a good way to see and to practice this, so that you know that you're getting this correctly. So let me go ahead and show you what the technique is and how I can remember what I'm doing. And the best way I can do that is if you look at your knits, your typical knits in stockinette, the front of your work, or let me back up first and say that you want to have live stitches, and you want to have live stitches on 2 different needles. Here's one swatch, and here is the second swatch. And I have the exact same number of stitches on each needle. In this case, I have 20 stitches on both needles. And I'm going to put the purl sides, or the wrong side here, I'm going to put purl side facing purl side. So I have a purl bump here, and I have a purl bump here. So I have purl bumps facing purl bumps. So if I look at it, I've got a knit side here, and I've got a knit side there. So purl bumps are facing purl bumps, or wrong sides are facing wrong sides. Then I've got a tapestry needle threaded with my contrasting yarn, and I'm using a blunt pointed tapestry needle. You know, tapestry needles come either in a sharp point or a blunt point. Sharp points tend to split your yarn, and here we don't want to split the yarn. So we're going to use a blunt point needle. Now, remember I said we're going to do a setup row, and the first setup row is an on. So I'm going to start with the front of my work. Now the front of your work is usually a knit side. So this is my little trick here. The front of my work is knit. So in the off on, if I'm going to be in the front of my work, I'm normally going to knit off and purl on. So that means this first thing I'm going to do for my setup row is I'm going to bring my tapestry needle through here, and I'm going to pull the yarn through, and I'm going to purl as though I'm going to use that as a purl and leave it on. Then I'm going to go to my back needle, and normally then on the back side of your work, the back side of any work is normally a purl, is it not? So this is the trick. Normally now I would be going to be off and on, so I would purl off and knit on. And remember, we're doing our setup row. So on this back side, I'm going to set it up by knitting on and then I'm going to leave that on. Now here's another trick. You always want to make sure that everything comes under those needles. You see how that yarn is coming under those needles. So now I have done this little setup row, and now we are home free. So we're going to go into our little mantra thing. Now many of these cheat sheets will say to come to the front of your work. Now we're at the front. What is the front of your work? The front of your work is a knit stitch usually. So we're going to knit off, which that means knit off. And what I do, many of these things will say to knit that off and pull your yarn through. What I do is I knit it off, and I don't pull my yarn through. I immediately put this through as the purl, then I pull my yarn through. So I'm saving some time. I take it to the back, and I'm going to the back of my work. Our mantra is off, on, but I'm on the back side, so I'm going to purl off. Immediately I pull that stitch off, and I don't waste any time, and I knit on. Then I pull that yarn through. Let me get that tail out of the way. And I try to get the tension carefully, but if I don't get the tension just right, I can always come in here after the fact like I was showing you earlier. So now I come to the front of the work, and remember it's off, on, but I'm on the front of the work. What is the front of the work? It's a knit stitch. So I'm going to knit off and purl on. So I knit and purl, and I bring the yarn through. Taking the yarn under the needles, I go to the back. What is the back of your work? The back of your work is a purl. So I'm going to purl off and knit on and pull that yarn through and try to tension that up a little bit. Well, so I'm at the back. Making sure the yarn is under my needles. You see how it's under the needles? I'm going to knit off and purl on. All right, I'm to the back. It's purl off, knit on. Do you see what I'm saying? It's off and on, off and on, off and on. And it's knowing which one it is. And since the yarn is coming from the back, I'm now coming to the front. And the front of my work is the knit side. So I'm going to knit off and purl on. Keeping that under those needles. Then I take it under there, and I go to the back. At the back is a purl, so it's purl off, knit on. Do you see how I'm not wasting time in pulling that yarn all the way through? There's so many times that say to pull it through each section, but I come to the front. The front is a knit, so it's knit off, purl on. Now, one thing you need to try to do is don't ever try to do a Kitchener stitch and put it down in the middle of your work. If the phone rings, let the phone ring. If the doorbell rings, just say, come back later. But go to the back of the work. The back is a purl side, is it not? So purl off, knit on, making sure that all goes under the needles. Come to the front. The front side is knit, so knit off, purl on. You see, all I'm doing is off, on, off, on, off, on. And it's which direction do I go based on what needle I'm on. I'm on the back needle now. The back of my work is a purl side. So I'm purling off and I'm knitting on. That's what makes my technique simple. I'm on the front of the work now. So the front of my work is knit. So I'm going to knit off and immediately purl on and pull that yarn through. I'm going to go to the back and I'm going to purl off and knit on. Now I pulled off about 3 to 4 times the length of yarn of the width of what I needed. And that's a way to make sure you have enough yarn. You don't want to run out of yarn. I'm on the front now, so I'm going to knit off and purl on. Going to the back, I'm purling off and knitting on. You see it's off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on. And you'll notice that I'm not being too conscious about the tension. I should be and I could be, but I'm doing that on purpose to show you how you can clean this up after the fact. So it's off, on. It's off, on. I'm to the front of my work. The front is a knit side, so it's knit off, purl on. I'm to the back of my work. Purl off, knit on. I probably should have done fewer stitches so it wouldn't take all day to get this off of here. Knit off, purl on. Remember, I'm going under the needle, so I'm to the back, purl off, knit on, knit off, purl on. I'm to the back, purl off, knit on, to the front, knit off, purl on. I'm going to the back, I'm going to purl off, knit on. I'm coming to the front. What is the front? The front is a knit, so I'm going to knit off and purl on. I'm going to the back. The back is a purl side, so I purl off, knit on. The front is knit off, purl on. The back is a purl, so I purl off, knit on. I'm about to run out of yarn, aren't I? I'm going to knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on, knit off. I'm trying to make this. I should have done the tension better and I wouldn't be out of yarn. Purl off, knit on, and now look, I'm to the last two stitches and I can only knit off and only purl off to the back, and I pull that through there. Now look, this is very loosey-goosey, is it not? So those look too loose, but you can see that the knit stitches are there, and so all I have to do to clean this up is to start back over here where I started and start to tighten this up. And I'm not going to take the time to do that all the way across there, but I'll do it for a few stitches. And if I had been more careful, I wouldn't really have to do this. And if I weren't exaggerating this whole thing, I would have, when I'm doing it on my own, I don't have to do so much of this. But you can see how once I cinch that up, that I end up with something that looks exactly like this. So I hope this helps you and that you can understand that if you just let your knitting talk to you and understand that mantra of off, on, and knowing that if you're in the front of your work, it's a knit, so you're going to knit off, purl on, and if you're in the back needle, it's usually a purl side, so you'll purl off, knit on. Makes Kitchener stitch very easy. I hope that helps you.